Okay, Don, sure.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Housing Committee. We're going to get started at 6:37 p.m. And do I go through the rules?
Yes, I'm going to move you over now.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So just to make sure that we make the best use of our time and your time, no one may speak without, let's see, I'm sorry. Give me just a moment.
I can do this for you if you'd like.
You know what it is? I'm in transit and I can't, for some reason,
No
make the
worries.
ground rules any bigger.
No worries, I got you.
Thank you.
Sure. I read off the ground rules. 1, no one may speak until granted the floor. 2, CB11 members, if you have a question about board business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear. You should be able to find the raise hands function there. If you still have technical difficulty, you may click the chat icon and relay your difficulty to the staff. 3, the chat function should not be used for CB11 business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us of any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information, like an email address, that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. Excuse me. Please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. Members of the public, if you have a question or comment about the subjects on the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom and wait to be recognized.
Thank you, Angel. Do we have an agenda to approve, or do we need to take the roll first? How do we?
We do the roll and then you can approve.
Okay. Okay. So if you would be so kind.
Sure. Committee members, when I call your name, please answer present. Juhai Chaudhry. Diane Collier.
Present.
Raja Flores. Brandon Gillespie is excused. John Green. Alonzo Johnson.
Present.
Beverly Pabon.
Present.
Claudia Perez.
Present.
Don Sanders.
Present.
Anne Marie Vasquez. Candy Beavis Vasquez.
Present.
Jason Wu. Okay, you have it.
Flores is here. Angel.
Raja Flores.
It's so good to see you.
Anne Marie Vasquez is here. Sorry.
All
Oh,
right.
then we're definitely on a roll tonight.
You guys are messing up my paper. Thank you. You have quorum.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'm guessing that the agenda has already been circulated.
Yes, of course.
And does anybody have any objections to the agenda for today? All right, hearing none. I think we're going to go ahead and adopt tonight's agenda. I don't think we're going to talk about last week's. Are we going to adopt last month's minutes or no?
Yeah, sure. They were
Okay.
posted and to be reviewed there, so you can approve them.
Okay, so as long as I was excused for the last meeting, I'm happy to approve the minutes. Does anybody have any other issue with the minutes from last month? Okay, seeing none, then we're gonna go ahead and approve last month's minutes. And then let's go ahead and open up our agenda if we can. I think, do we start with announcements? All righty.
So I just have one quick one, just to remind folks again that the mayor has extended the COVID-19 emergency declaration, and as such, public bodies such as community boards are allowed to continue to meet remotely, such as we are tonight. That order is in place through December 20th, the date of our full board meeting. So all of CB11's meetings through the end of the year will be remote. I
do see our chair. So I will hand the meeting back over to our chair, John Green, and I will be in transit. So I'm still here, but I will be in transit. Mr. Green, are you good to go?
Yes, ma'am, I am. I apologize, everybody. I'm having problems with my laptop. I'm sorry for being late.
So I'm going to defer to you. We adopted the agenda and we accepted last month's minutes, and we just heard announcements. So unless there's more announcements, I'm handing it back over.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. If there's no other announcements from the committee or the public, we shall continue on from here. Oh, I see hand up. Yes, Beth.
I'm always getting this wrong, so I'm not sure if this would be an announcement or new business. Announcement part, I guess, is that I went to Barnard College is having an exhibition about redlining throughout different cities, and I was hoping that maybe when we can have a trip with the land use to see this exhibition. I'll send the chair the information, but it's a great, it's there until June of 23. And I think that's a great opportunity for people to go see how redlining has affected our thing.
Just at the,
And that's it.
okay, Beverly, that was discussed at the executive committee meeting, was it not? This sounds familiar.
I'm not sure. I wasn't at the executive meeting.
It was a meeting that I heard this about this exhibit. Yes, I do remember about the news about this exhibit. I do. But we can work on that within the next few months. That's definitely we can do that, Beverly. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any informational updates from the committee? Are there any informational updates from the public? Okay, seeing no hands, we can go straight through to our discussion tonight. The committee discussion is in reference to intro 0632-2022-A local law to amend the administrative code of the city of New York in relation to prohibiting housing discrimination on the basis of arrest record or criminal history. The New York City Council's Committee on Civil and Human Rights will hold a hearing on this matter on December 8th at 10 a.m., which is this coming Thursday. Okay, this is a matter that was an idea ever since my predecessor as chair of this committee was around, but now it's going to be, well, they're going to basically debate on whether or not this should become a law in this city. Are there any comments on this matter from the committee?
John, if I may, this is Angel.
Sure.
So this item was added at request of the board chair. We sent around the language of the introduction. We extended an invitation to the chief sponsor, Councilmember Powers. Unfortunately, they did not have the flexibility to attend, but we were able to get Deputy Speaker Diana Ayala to attend, and she's on the call.
Oh, great.
So she's also a co-sponsor. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that, Diana. On the introduction that will be voted on, that will be heard, there will be a hearing on later this week. So if she wanted to share a couple of comments, and then the committee could enter into its conversation, if you're okay with that, John.
Oh, absolutely. Diana, the floor is yours.
Hey, John, how are you?
Okay, and you?
Good. I mean, I'm not sure. I think I was hoping also to kind of get some feedback from the community board. So I am one of 31 members that are signed on to this piece of legislation. And it's, it seems complicated, but the gist of it is really that the council is looking to minimize ways in which an individual can be discriminated against, right, for purposes of finding housing. It's the same thing that we've been doing around employment. And the reason is, because we have, we've had applicants, we have constituents that have, consistently complained about being denied for housing because they had a misdemeanor, right? Because they had a minor arrest. So, it sounds like, right, when you're hearing it, I can see how it can be kind of a little bit alarming. I think when it was first proposed, one of my concerns was, background checks on sex offenders. But that is not prohibited through this bill. If you are a landlord in, let's say, the New York City Public Housing Authority, a state or a federally funded building that requires background screening, that will not be prohibited, but it would be prohibited from tenement buildings primarily, right? Like the one that I live in. My landlord would not be able to deny me an apartment, or wouldn't even be allowed to look up my criminal history as part of the application process. What else is there in it? Yeah, I think, so again, there's going to be a hearing, right? So when we draft a bill, it's not, the end of the conversation is basically an idea, right? That we, in partnership with advocates, put together. And then there will be a hearing, which you're more than welcome to participate in. You can listen in, or you can come and testify if you have a special objection or concern, or just want to be on record. Everyone is welcome. And then based on the feedback that we get at the hearing, then the chair, right, the prime sponsor has the ability to make edits to the bill, or decide to leave it as is. And then it goes to the full body, and then we'll decide whether or not we're going to pass it. So, I don't want anyone to think that we're trying to rush this. This bill's been around since last session, and was
We lost your audio there, Councilmember
Yeah,
Ayala.
yeah.
You hear me now?
Now we can.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. But so I would love to kind of hear some of your concerns as well. And then, I'm happy to bring those back and come back again and, share some updates. But that's kind of where we are.
Okay, thank you, Diana. My concern was one that you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks. So, but since that's been addressed, that I don't have any other questions. But I see there's a couple of people who have their hands up. Rajab, you have the floor is yours, sir.
So Diana, my understanding is this doesn't apply to NYCHA. So at the federal level, they can still get into your records. This is just for private
Yes.
homeowners.
Yes.
So if you're applying to NYCHA, they still can look at your record, et cetera.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We don't have jurisdiction over anything federal or state. So, that this is as far as we can go. And that's what we're looking at right now.
Okay, Beverly.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Ayala. My question was the first one I had that was answered regarding NYCHA. So what about HPD and any joint ventures that projects that HPD would do with a private developer or nonprofit or for-profit organization? Would they be exempt, or would they have to abide by these proposed new law?
No, they would not. They wouldn't be exempt. The only criteria for an exemption is that it wouldn't apply. Let me read it to you. So it says this section does not apply to where federal, state, or local laws, rules, or regulations require the exclusion based on criminal history or require a criminal background check for eligibility. So there are, even within the state, within the city boundaries, some types of housing, right? Types that would require that level of engagement. In a tenement building like mine, right? And a lot of our nonprofits have, like Whole Community, Operation Fight Back. They don't have a reason to check that, right? We don't have a requirement that says that they have to. There's no reason they would have to be able to support that. And so, no, they wouldn't be allowed
So-
to check.
So HPD can check if it's already on the books because it's a city.
Yes.
Okay,
But it depends.
it-
I would imagine it depends for the, on the type of housing, right? Like if you're talking about just, a regular residential building, then that, may be different than if you're living in an HPD funded, assisted living facility, right? Like there's different types of housing. If we're talking about a senior residence, right? Like there are different restrictions. So in the way that the legislation was drafted, it's not as specific, but I think that they also leave a little bit of wiggle room, right? For specificity, because we want to hear back, right? At the hearing, we want to hear feedback, so that can be included as part of the language.
yeah, the reason why I was asking is because I know in the past, HPD has restricted tenants from living in the apartment with the tenant of record if they got arrested and had any type of criminal background. And so I just want to know whether that would still be the case, or or they lifted and maybe the people, if it's like you said, just a misdemeanor or something like that, can still be able to even live with someone that's in an HPD owned building, because HPD does own a lot of property and what they manage and stuff like that.
I mean, I would have to check on. I think it would depend on the building. I would have to look into that. But
Mhm.
if that was the case, it's probably because they're getting some sort of maybe state or federal funding for those buildings, and that's where the requirement will kick in.
Okay, thank you so very much.
I mean, the idea, I just want you guys to know, like, the idea is not to make anyone feel unsafe, right? I live in a residential building.
Right.
I don't want to feel unsafe either, right? But I also don't know that I'm sure, and I know of incidents where some of my neighbors have gotten arrested for maybe dealing pot or stupid misdemeanors or whatever, and they don't pose a threat to me as a resident. The damage is to themselves, and but they shouldn't be prohibited a place to live, right, or a place to work in perpetuity because of it. And that's what happens. You have,
Right.
even in public housing, if you commit a felony, depending on the type of felony it is, like you can be banned from housing for your entire life, or you can be banned for 10 years, like, which, and right now, we're in a really peculiar place because we're in the midst of, one of the most serious housing crises of our time. We have, I think it's upwards of almost 60,000 individuals in shelter. And the only way to really get ourselves out of that is to make it easier for people to be able to qualify for available units. And we know that there are quite a number, and I think that there'll be a hearing coming up on that soon, of rent stabilized units that are being warehoused as we speak.
Mhm.
And so the idea is really just to make it easier and fair, right? So that we're all in the same, in the same space, right, when we're starting our apartment search.
Yes, it's definitely needed. And I see the hardship a lot of people have with a criminal record, and even with the history that I'm learning about with the redlining, and certain things was put
right.
in the wordings of books and whatever, to stop us from being able to be in a house, living in affordable housing or housing in general. So it's a lot to work into and to look at in order to make
Yeah.
this something that we can all work with and live with. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Candy?
Hi, I have, is actually a comment and a question. So the comment is that, the new housing HPD had issued out for the marketing, guidelines that when it comes to the formerly incarcerated, if they've done anything in the past for the crime, this is now within the lottery phase. So I don't know. I know that applications right now, that criminal background check, it all depends on, based on what that person is doing now, not what it was done in their past. The only people that would probably have a bigger problem is, and it depends on the level, is the sex offenders.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and they have their
Mhm.
own restrictions. There are,
Right,
in terms of sex offenders, they're in their own category, and you can still check for that
right,
under this bill. But there are, many restrictions and a lot of oversight when you're a registered sex offender. You have to be on a list. Your people have to know, where it is that you live. And you are banned from being able to reside in certain locations. So
right.
that wouldn't be impacted by this.
Yeah, okay. So also, Diana, my question is that why can't there be a conversation with both federal, state, and city to discuss this issue, to lift up at least and that whole regulation, especially with NYCHA? Like, I think it's best that if we can have that done where we could all sit down on the table with all of them, all three
Mhm.
agencies, and
Right.
this way they can hear us out, even if it's your hearing, bringing them into our community to listen to what we have to say about that and how we feel about it, because at the end of the day, everybody deserves a second chance. That
Yeah,
person that walked in doing time comes back out, is
yeah.
based on what you're doing with your life right now, should not be penalized because they already did their time to society,
Right.
No,
so.
it's a stupid rule. I get it. I've had, I've had family members that have, my brother was, I talk about it, quite frequently, so it's not a secret, but I have a younger brother that suffers from serious mental illness, and, he was always quite problematic, and he was 12, 13 years old when my mother was forced to remove him from her lease because he kept getting arrested out on the street. And
It's
he
not
was a
right.
baby, right? He was a baby, and he's never been able, I mean, he had a life time ban on living in public housing. So you imagine being a parent having to make that decision, right? Now the same brother with the same mental health problems, the same issues, has lived with me. He hasn't created any issues for anybody, right? So I think these rules create more stigma
Mhm.
around issues that primarily impact Black and brown communities. And so
Yes.
that's what we're trying to correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So I hope you can take up that's request as a comment,
I
to
think that's a good
have.
idea, Candy. I think that what you do, right, is monitor what's happening on the city level, and then if we're able to pass this piece of legislation and introduce it into law and it works, right? And then I think that there's an argument to be made to do the same at the state and federal level. We don't have, any discretion. We can make suggestions, but I think it's also, as we progress, I think it will probably be helpful to maybe invite the Congress member's office, right?
Right,
Or your state legislator to the committee to talk through some of these issues, because I agree with you. A lot of these laws, these rules are really outdated. They've been around for, maybe
Since
50,
the
60
30s.
years. Like, yeah, it's
yeah.
crazy.
But it's not
Um,
only that these agencies don't speak to each other. So this will open up a whole
Yeah.
conversation, and it also brings them up to speed of what we're going through right now, rather than to have antiquated laws,
yes,
you
that's
know?
right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So thank you for considering that, but that's definitely needed.
Yes, I agree.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Xavier?
I'll let Dawn go first and then I'll
Okay,
chime in.
okay,
I
fine.
presented this to the committee.
Okay, Don.
Hi there. So I guess I have a few concerns. Like most recently, my son, his school realized that they had a sex offender who had just simply changed their name and is working at the school for extended period of time. And it just it makes me worry about the types of cases that could slip through the cracks. And the fact that I think some smaller landlords, once someone gets into your property, you were not going to be able to get them to leave, pretty much, as I understand it. And in fact, during the pandemic, there were people who had to leave their houses because they couldn't get people to leave their homes. And I just wonder if we further disincentivize people taking a chance by just removing their ability to have like some authority over their homes. And so I'm not necessarily thinking about large landlords. I'm just thinking about, you know, someone who's people who are in a co-op, they're subleasing. I think they can already check a person's credit, but they can't know if, you know, if that person was, you know, what their criminal background is. And I just don't see how that incentivizes people to stop warehousing, I guess. And then the example I gave you about at my son's school, where, you know, it's really easy to just slip into a program without any oversight. And then who's supposed to sort that out? Is that the landlord now that does that? Who goes in and says, well, hey, you got into this home under false pretenses and now you won't leave? Like, I just wonder.
I mean, but the person is working at a school, right?
Not anymore.
No, but was working, changed their name and was working at a school. I mean, that's part of their background. You know, there are, you know, very strict and specific rules that prohibit a sex offender from working. And also depending, right? I think that this is kind of like in line with what we're talking about, right? You know, when I used to hear the word sex offender, I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible, right? And there are different levels of sex offenders, right? You have sex offenders, you have a person that maybe you had a 17-year-old that had a relationship with a 15-year-old, and the, you know, parent found out and called the police, and because that 15-year-old was not 16, which is the legal age of consent, now that 17-year-old have to register as a sex offender, right? And that doesn't go away. So when we hear the word sex offender, we automatically assume like the worst case scenario, and that's not always true. You know, I mean, I'm not minimizing that this happens, but there are very specific laws that prohibit sex offenders, specifically the ones with the higher, more serious categories, which are 2 and 3s, from living within, you know, schools or, you know, I don't know all of the specifics of it, but they're very strict, because this was exactly my concern. And you know, from again, this legislation would not prohibit you as a landlord or any landlord from being able to access that information, which you should have. But in terms of like what happened in the schools, you know, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, other than, you know, obviously they need to check their process, right? Because I remember trying to apply for a job with the Board of Education many moons ago, and you have to be fingerprinted. And so as part of that process alone, it should have been flagged.
Yeah, thank you, council member. I didn't want to dwell on that other issue, but I mean, when people are coming from out of state, it just seems like we're opening the doors to types of crime that are not now, you know, that might be flagged now. And especially, it's one thing to, you know, to rent to people who have, you know, in this community, but then to open the doors where anybody can come in and we blindly take them into housing. I don't know, that is harder for me to deal with, but I do appreciate your response, and yeah, I do appreciate you giving us those examples where we need to empathize with our neighbors. I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Xavier?
Thank you, John, and thank you, Councilmember Ayala, for being here. What I've been encouraging the board is to be more engaged with proposed legislation at the city level, the state level, and the federal level, as it will affect our community. And this particular one was brought to my attention by several concerned constituents and on both sides of the debate. And I thought it was very important, especially since we didn't have a heavy schedule or itinerary with this housing committee, for us to discuss this. As it relates to, and again, it's, again, we're trying to be proactive and how do we reintegrate? I know that one of the hurdles, and I talked to several formerly incarcerated individuals, and they said, yes, that played a part. They said the biggest thing was the cost of rent. That actually was the higher hurdle for them to overcome. And I think that's something definitely I would encourage with your colleagues to tackle, how we can put some additional rungs back in the ladder for affordability. So that's one component I would recommend. I don't think that the way this is currently crafted, that it would necessarily help that. Now, it's on page 3, item 3, when it deals with the New York Sex Offense Registry. You have to register when you come, but not everyone does. And I think the way this is written, it kind of limits your ability to access other states. And of course, there are ways to go around that, but I think it would behoove the council to consider allowing for more of a latitude for acquiring those records. The other component,
But the sex offender, just because the sex offender registry is a national registry, and yes, I can decide. If I'm court mandated to get on the registry, and I decide, what I'm not going to. There is a lot of oversight over that. So I'm sure, do people do that? I'm sure that they try, but are they successful? I don't think so, because you can go back to jail if you don't. I mean, they're very, very strict with that.
Yeah, I'm just saying a recommendation is to tighten it. The other component is, I was curious why there was not there are two issues, and I would like this committee to ideally discuss it, is that there's a similar bill that was passed in New Jersey, bill text NJS 250 during the 2020-2021 legislation, that really dove in significantly deeper and assigning rights and securities across the board for everyone. And I was curious why that was not utilized as a potential blueprint for this particular piece of legislation.
Well, again, these pieces of legislation are drafted with the recommendation of a multitude of, stakeholders, right? Groups, advocates, legal, attorneys that work in this field. It doesn't mean that it won't. I just heard about the New Jersey one today, so I haven't read it, to be honest. But it would be at the discretion of the co-prime, the prime sponsor of the bill. My understanding is that he's not interested. I'm not sure why. And I guess we'll all, learn what the justification for that is on the 8th at the hearing. But yeah, I get it. Look, this is, we want to, we, especially in light of what's happening, today, and in the last few years, right, the city feels somewhat unstable and and not safe, and we don't, the intention is never to make it any worse, but there is a lot of implicit bias, right, in everything that Black and brown individuals engage in, whether it's medical care, whether it's employment, whether it's housing, and quite frankly, if you were a person that was a little bit more privileged, like you probably wouldn't even be subject to the same level of scrutiny. And I think that and I don't want to speak for the sponsor, but the objective has always been for for myself and for several of my colleagues to even the playing field. And sometimes, right, that's difficult to digest, but there's a rhyme and a rhythm to it. So I think that where we can implement edits and language into the bill, where the the larger community and even landlords feel like their rights are being considered, right, without trampling on anyone's right to housing or to then we can always do that. So I would also encourage, if you're not able to, maybe you can submit written testimony on some of your concerns for the hearing, and then we'll see, right, what happens afterwards. But there's no, I don't, it isn't my understanding that we're looking to pass this ASAP. It's a little bit of a complicated process.
Okay, and I appreciate, and again, we did invite the prime sponsor, Councilmember Powers, whose declination to engage was a little abrupt.
He's actually not, he's in Israel, so.
Oh, no,
they
no,
have-
but we asked for a staff member who was responsible for the
Oh,
drafting, and they were not as engaging as you are.
okay.
We'll leave it at that. But I do want to impress, because I did, because again, let's take this and kind of, I really want the committee to start, and I see there's some hands that have come up. But let's, there's a provision that if you say are in a duplex situation, or you have in a townhouse that you've seen a lot of those converted over, that this law wouldn't apply. But then you have those that converted their homes who have floor throughs and they bought back in the 60s or whatnot. And several of those individuals I've spoken with, expressed their concerns, and they are both Black and Latino. And they said, listen, this would put them at risk, and they would just not rent if they had to choose so. I think the bigger thing, and again, we do believe that getting people reintegrated into society who paid their time is important. And I think that's why I was referring to the New Jersey bill, because it does put everything out in a very tiered, a sensible, logical approach. It also allows that in the event of liability, and I reached out because, as you know, when we lived abroad, we rented our place. And it was after speaking with our insurance company and then our previous insurer, that not being able to put all the provisos in check would put a certain degree of liability on the owners in that case, and wouldn't be covered by standard housing, standard homeowners insurance or landlord insurance. And so I think that's something else to also take under consideration on, so that way so look at the bill, and I'll let the committee, but I thought it was important for us to gauge, and you being here matters, because that's part of what our process should be about. So I highly recommend this committee. I think it was sent around to them earlier today, and please do continue the conversation after the meeting as well.
Thank you, Xavier. Raja?
Sage Mason had her hand up before me.
Okay, Ms. Mason?
Hi, this is Sage Mason. Thank you for joining us, Councilmember Ayala. I was wondering if there is a report somewhere that just gives some more details on the numbers of people, one, who were affected by discrimination on the basis of their criminal history, and then also how many people would be affected in terms of who would no longer be subject to the exemptions that are in the bill. Because I imagine that the majority of people would still, who are looking for housing, would be looking for affordable housing, and that would still be subject to state and federal laws. So I just wonder how many people would this actually help?
Yeah, no, that's a good question and a good point. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, to be honest, but I'm assuming that I'm sorry, can you give me a second? No, can you tell Papi to be quiet? My dad is like so loud. It's like, you have a kid and they know that you're on the phone and all of a sudden they want to talk to you. As soon as he knows that I'm on, he talks loud. But yeah, sorry about that. I'm sure that it'll come up, during the hearing this week, and is it this week or next week? I'm happy to have that information sent over to you guys.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Or any
And
like
again,
report.
remember that once we have the hearing, the idea of the hearing is to kind of hear feedback, and then we make decisions. And so it is not uncommon for a bill to change. That's why, when you see this as, introduction, 1080A or B, is because there have been several renditions of the bill.
All right, thank you so much.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee or from the public? Okay, seeing none. Are there any comments that the committee would like to make?
This is Dawn, and I can't see my hand raised. So,
Okay, go ahead, Dawn.
yeah, so I guess you know, something that I've started to consider a lot more is looking at our plans for our communities with the lens of what people have been through and not recovered from over the last few years. And so I just hope that as revisions are made or more thought is given, we can just reflect on how many people were in very dangerous situations while people could not be removed from their homes, and think about, you know, how that impacts people. So you know, if this was pre-pandemic, we wouldn't even be talking, I guess, so much about our concerns. But because the pandemic provided 2 years of people living in all types of situations, including domestic violence situations, all kinds of violent situations, and there was really no checks and balances to keep them safe. And I just worry about now making that part of the law, that they have no right to know who they're sharing their home with. So again, you know, not to belabor, but I just feel like, you know, given what happened to people within the pandemic, and again, you know, there were people living in domestic violence situations that just had nowhere else to go. But given what we've been through, I just hope we can be sensitive to what we can expect, especially small landlords, to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. Oh, and one thing I want to say is that I want to thank Councilmember Ayala for attending tonight's meeting. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
Angel?
guys. It was so nice to hear from you.
Okay, Angel?
Thank you, council member.
Thanks, Jen. I actually had a quick question for the council member before she jumped off. So in terms of submitting testimony or attending the hearing, and I know it's listed as in person, but is it a hybrid meeting? Can you submit testimony remotely, or do you have to be there in person if you're not like emailing?
No. Only members are required to be there. Members of the public can do hybrid.
Thank you, council member. And then my other like little bit to say is not to the council member, but just more generally. I guess if there exists, or if perhaps if there should exist, some kind of recourse or some kind of remedy or potential avenue for remedy for a property owner that is, you know, experiencing a difficulty with a tenant, you know, be it for this or that reason. Perhaps we should be more informed about that, or we should make ourselves more informed about that, what the challenges are for a landlord to deal with a, you know, with a problematic tenant, whatever that problem is. However, I do take a bit of pause with some of the discussion that seems to defend in part discrimination in housing, where the history has been for, oh God, so long, to find every potential, you know, reason or justification to discriminate as it relates to housing, you know. And I know that, you know, in our neighborhood, you know, because of the population and the demographics, you know, we often, you know, use the terms, you know, Black and brown communities, but it's, you know, poor communities more generally also. And you know, less powerful, you know, communities, or, you know, less politically active communities, or where that discrimination is, you know, endemic and has, you know, has molded communities and has scarred communities and, you know, traumatized communities for decades upon decades. And to, you know, even entertain a little bit of a discussion about finding ways to, you know, to keep discrimination in place gives me a lot of pause, and it's kind of hard to hear. That's not to say that, you know, landlords shouldn't have any remedies. I completely understand that. I don't know that they should be minimized. They should have, you know, all that they need to do to be able to manage their business. However, I don't think that it's the, you know, the best idea to be giving, you know, or defending, you know, tactics that are used by unscrupulous landlords to discriminate against people for whatever their life experience is. You know, this law speaks to, or this proposed law, this introduction speaks to, arrest. You can be arrested for a whole bunch of stuff and you're not guilty, but that's going to disqualify you from housing. Forgive me, but I think that's outrageous. If it's, depending on the severity of what the arrest is for, or the severity of what the criminal history is for, then perhaps the deeper investigation has to be, taken. But if you've been accused of something or arrested wrongly, you should be disqualified from housing. I don't know that we should be lining up behind such a suggestion or an idea. When so many in our community have been wrongly arrested, like we just went through this with stop and frisk, like that's disqualifying what percentage of our neighborhood, like so much. I don't know that we want to take a step back when we're finally seeing, public policy that's actually being put in place or considered, that's, responding to all the cries and concerns that have been expressed for, decades upon decades without, a willing ear at the council or at the state or at the federal level. And finally, we have, this discussion is more, it is a more regularly had and considered discussion. I don't know that we should be putting the brakes on. Anyway, that I just wanted to share a couple of comments.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you very much for your comment. Jason?
Hi, everyone. I just want to second what Angel was saying. I really appreciated, Angel, how you kind of tied some of this in, because I'm a housing attorney in my day job, and I see rampant discrimination. I see how hard it is for low-income communities to access housing. And on this community board, we talk very frequently about homelessness and the rampant homelessness that we see in our community, in this district, and all over the city. I think any kind of laws and policies that promote access to housing, especially given the communities that we serve and represent in this district, who have been impacted by mass incarceration in the criminal legal system and over policing. I think we need to just be very careful about what we're saying and what we believe will actually help our communities. And so to allow a right to discriminate based on arrest record or criminal history, and the impact that would have on people looking for housing, where do we want them to go? If they can't find housing, where do we want them to go? On the street, right? Do we want to see them on the street? Do we want them to be homeless? And so I think we really have to think about the ramifications of what it means to allow some of this to continue. I think it's really a positive step in the right direction to introduce this kind of legislation that would prohibit this kind of discrimination. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Dawn?
I really appreciate having those 2 points of view. And I just want to acknowledge that, because it is really important to make sure that we're advocating and we're not part of the problem. The issue I have, and this is not just with the city council, it's also with the state, it's maybe with the federal, is that all of our policies, our strong arm policies, really hurt the poor, and the wealthy or well-established are able to dance around those policies because somehow the legislators are not bold enough to crack down on the most profitable and the most lucrative of businesses. It seems to be that poor landlords, poor people who drive, poor people who need extra services, those people are the ones that are punished when we're trying to go after the systemic issues. And that's where I'm not so impressed with just forcing people to adhere to laws that are not equally applied to everyone. And I would really like to see some really tough legislation that says, hey, you can't warehouse these anymore. That's it. We're gonna put our foot down. Instead, we're telling like the small landlord, okay, you have to let just anybody in your house and they can stay there indefinitely. You can't afford a lawyer to do anything about it. You can't protect your family while they're there. And if they cause any trouble, you can't even have a weapon or, so I just feel like a lot of what we do just impacts the poor, and we don't have the guts to go after the people we know are causing, the most blatant discrimination. That's worrisome to me. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion, that we need to be brave enough to get through to the people who have the resources and are going to skirt around the laws, and really have laws that don't just affect poor people, but also affect the wealthy and the powerful and people with lawyers. Alrighty, that's it.
Thank you, Dawn. Candy?
I just want to agree with what between Angel and what Jason said. And considering that, my day job that does pay me, we deal with a lot of, and even afterwards, but we deal with a lot of people that are coming in, and a lot of formerly incarcerated. And I'm just glad, like I said, that HPD was a little, was flexible. Over the summertime, they changed that law with the criminal background check as being, holding back for anyone who had a criminal background. The marketing agent has to be the one for them to explain to the marketing agent how they have changed their life around, and that will determine with them actually being accepted to the development that they're going to be potentially a tenant. But I do feel that in the private sector, because people do have money, and I just feel like this is all being done only for those that are getting subsidies. And that should just be open all across the border. It shouldn't just be on the subsidy side, But I do agree with Angel and with Jason. That's in my comment.
Thank you, Candy. Beverly? Beverly, if you're talking, you're still muted.
Okay, thank you. The law that they're trying to change, am I being heard? Oh
Yes,
God.
we can hear you.
Okay, with Angel and Candy and Jason was speaking about the systemic racism and laws that's been put, 60 years, since the 1930s, is a big part of what we're trying to change now. So how I understand that, we need to be cautious about people, because I do have people that do things over and over, the wrong people over and over again, and commit crimes again and again. It's really kind of, how can I say this? We're looking at the past and trying to change bad policies from, trying to change bad policies to make them more better for everybody that, who's been discriminated from. So when this law that you're trying to propose, does it mean that the landlords cannot look in somebody's background? They can't do a background check at all? Or they just can't deny housing based just on that? Because I'm not sure of what are you trying to deny them housing for? I mean, or saying that, well, you have a criminal record, you can't have the housing. It's not, or the landlords can't look into somebody's criminal background.
The landlords can't look into your criminal background.
And so they can't do any search whatsoever.
No, they
on
can
s-
search your, I mean, usually from my understanding is, and Candy can probably, speak to this better than I, but because I'm not a landlord, that, usually when we as tenants, right? And I'm a tenant, apply for housing, landlords typically run income and credit checks, right? And through that process, they often, not, I'm assuming it doesn't happen all of the time, but quite often subject us to criminal background checks, which you wouldn't even know about, right? So you'd be denied an apartment and wouldn't even know why, because they have no obligation to even tell you that. So this would minimize, right, it would prevent those landlords from being able to pull your arrest record or criminal history.
But like Candy was thinking, it's just for private landlords. It's not going across the whole board. Everybody needs to be at the table,
I
federal,
agree.
state, and everybody, because it's not going across the whole board. So I can understand why one of our people was talking about the small landlords. I can see them being concerned about that, and especially with domestic violence and stuff like that. But it should be across the whole board, because there has been laws put into place at the federal level, at the state level, against housing, and it's usually Black and brown communities. In fact, usually it was mostly for Black and brown communities. So and that needs to be really taken into consideration. And if we're going against laws that's already been put on the books that was fueling this, what specific laws that they have in it can be repealed in order, that we have a little more fair balance on both sides, instead of having a whole brand new legislation law put into place. Look at the laws that was put on the books already and make the changes, appealing or repealing any of the laws that they had in there, and take them out. Because this is I hear both sides, and I'm concerned about both sides, because you don't want people that's committing crimes over and over and over again, and you can't get them out your apartment or your apartment building, or even within your own household. What about the people who's living with people like that? So it's just a thing to bring in. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Can I clarify something, John? I think
Sure.
if there's an individual that is a renter and already has possession of an apartment, and while they're living in that apartment, they commit, a crime that impacts the building, their neighbors, or, I mean, even if you're renting a room to somebody and that person is, committing some sort of illegality, there's nothing that prevents you from going to court and seeking an eviction. That's nothing. There's no law changing that, right? This is only something that would happen before you even had a key to the apartment, right? This is just while you're still under consideration for the apartment. And unfortunately, a lot of people are disqualified from these units because they have a criminal record, and it's not specific. It doesn't have to be specific. I don't think that there's a law that says that they have to check, but there's nothing that says that they don't have to. So they use it at their discretion, and while they're using it at their discretion, they're unfairly denying individuals housing.
Thank you, Dan. I would love to continue this, but there's been a request that we have to end this meeting at 7:40. But I will say first, I want to say thank you, Diana, for explaining this law to us and letting us know about the hearing on Thursday.
Yes,
And
anytime.
it's appreciated. Okay, Xavier.
John, I'll make it very quick. I value what everyone's input is on this, which is why I implore everyone just to take a look at the other New Jersey bill. So we can actually, because again, we want to reintegrate, we want to bring people back in. And I think the thing is, listening to both sides of it, weighing out a very measured approach is important. And I value everyone on this board, everyone's passion and their commitment and the openness to engage in the dialogue. And so I just implore everyone, look at both of them. I know they just dropped on your laps this morning, I think. But look at the two and how they're fleshed out and written in such a way. And I think there is, and if we can possibly prepare some kind of written testimony, that would be great. So I appreciate everyone. I know there's a hard out coming up. Thank you, Councilmember Ayala, and value all of you and your work and input.
Thank you, Ziggy. Are there, okay, is there any new business or old business from the committee? No. Okay, hearing nothing from old business, then from new business. Okay, Angel, could you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Thanks, John. Juhaib Chowdhury. Diane Collier.
Present.
Roger Flores. Brandon Gillespie is excused. John Green.
Here.
Lonzo Johnson. Beverly Pabon.
Present.
Claudia Perez.
Present.
Dawn Sanders.
Present.
Anne-Marie Vasquez.
Present.
Candy Vasquez. Candy Rivas
Present.
Vasquez. Sorry,
Present.
I
It's
missed one.
okay. It's the same person.
And Jason Wu.
Present.
Okay,
Thank you. You have quorum.
Okay, thank you for everybody for your questions and your comments. This is the last meeting of the year. Wish you a happy holiday, and the next meeting will be on Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. Okay, so I'm adjourning this meeting at 7:39 p.m. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
I
Good night.